Hello, Misfits, and welcome. In today's video, we are talking all about the TPK, the Total Party Kill. What is it? How do they happen? Are they even okay? And how do you continue afterwards? So let's get into all of that right now. And I should preface this by saying that these are my own thoughts and opinions. They might not be the same as yours, and that is totally fine. There is so much room for us to all have very different views of how to play the game and run the game, and that's what makes it super cool. So, take from this what you will and what you enjoy, and then ignore the rest. So, a TPK, what is it? It's when the entire party dies. It's when everybody gets wiped out, either in some sort of crazy combat situation or maybe it's some sort of event that happens within the campaign or the session, what have you. Regardless, everybody gets killed. I wouldn't necessarily say that TPKs are super common, but they do happen, and I think how common or frequently they occur really depends on each table and what type of game is being played. So keep that in mind. But there are a bunch of different things that could lead to a TPK, so let's talk about that. First things first, you may encounter a TPK just because the dice were just not on your side that day. Sometimes you're rolling and it's just not working out for you, and for whatever reason, the dice gods have decided that today is not your day and your character must die. If that happens to you, I am truly very, very sorry. I do feel for you. There are certain aspects of the game in which the dice gods are never my friends, so I totally understand. You may experience a TPK due to poor dice rolls. I will never roll high on initiative because of my dice rolls. That's just sort of how it works for me. But yeah, this can absolutely lead to a TPK, and if it's not poor rolls for the players, it could be just extremely good rolls for the DM. And it's a rough situation, and also I think what's sometimes frustrating about this is there's really no one to blame. It just sort of happened, and you have to deal with it and figure out how to move forward afterwards, and just wonder, why were my dice so mean to me that day? Why are they cursed? What did I do to deserve such a fate? But that's definitely one reason. Another thing that could lead to a TPK is just poor decisions from the players. Did the DM ask you if you would like to take a short rest or maybe stop and take a long rest, and you said, no, let's continue on? Did you hear a cacophony of monstrous noises coming from the left tunnel, and then nothing from the right, and then chose to go down the left? Did you not buy any healing potions at the last town you were at? Did you forget to investigate for traps? That kind of stuff. Sometimes we just make poor decisions as players, and sometimes there are significant consequences. And this is a frustrating thing, but it will probably teach you to be a little bit more attentive or a little bit more careful in certain areas. But it could certainly lead to a TPK. Sometimes TPKs happen because of the DM's poor planning. Maybe they misjudged how many encounters the party could handle in one day, and, that last one was just a bit too much. Maybe they really totally forgot to account for action economy within the encounter, and the monsters just had way more turns than the players, and they just wiped you all out. Maybe they put a trap in a dungeon that just really was probably just a little bit too powerful for their level, and it just totally wiped you out. There's lots of things that the DM could have misjudged or poorly planned that leads to a TPK. And that's a frustrating one for the DM because you don't necessarily want that TPK to happen, I know that sometimes we think the DMs are these mustache-twirling villains, and they're like, ooh, I'm gonna get them. I totally want to kill the party and stuff. We typically don't actually want to kill everybody in the party. We actually are kind of rooting for you guys and want the heroes to win at the end of the story. So when this happens and it's our fault, normally we feel pretty bad about it, but that's definitely something that could lead to a TPK, just poor planning. Another reason you might have a TPK is because your DM is just a horrible trash human being. Sometimes people sit in the DM seat that should not, and sometimes they think it's fun to just kill characters out of spite, or I don't know, because they're on some weird power trip. I know I have read numerous Reddit stories about these like awful TTRPG games where the DM is just not a good person and they just have it out for the players. And honestly, they should probably never be in the DM seat, but unfortunately for some of these circumstances, they are, and that's why you experienced a TPK. And then one of the last reasons that could lead to a TPK is for some weird story-related event. You know, there is something that the DM has planned within the story, something happens, and it leads to the entire party dying. And this is a weird one. It definitely really depends on each table. It depends on like the setup leading up to it. It depends on what's been discussed in session 0. That can be a pretty divisive one, but sometimes it's just plain old story reasons, like a scripted event that could lead to the entire party dying. Out of all of these, really the only one that's just never okay is the malicious DM that's just out to get you. That one's just not cool, so if that is you, stop, you know? People don't really like that. That's not super enjoyable. I mean, I guess if you found a table of players that are super into that, then that's great. You can all just be happy, doing that, but typically, that's not an okay thing. That's generally pretty frowned upon. But all of these others are totally understandable reasons that could lead to a TPK, or, are accepted reasons that could lead to a TPK. But there are some important things that should probably happen before or after the TPK. Generally, I think it's good to discuss in session 0 your expectations for the game, and one of those might be just sitting down and talking about how everybody feels about their character dying. Like, do they know that that's a possibility? Are they super new to D&D and they don't know that their characters can die? Because if they don't, you should probably tell them, and you should tell them before they start playing the game and start getting super attached. But yeah, discuss with your players the sort of understanding that their characters might die, gauge how okay they are with it. It's up to you. If you want to every single time, like Deus Ex Machina, come in and save the day and keep their characters alive, that's on you. Just make sure that that's something that kind of like gets discussed, I think most players would be frustrated if that aspect of the game was totally taken out without their knowledge, or without any of their input, so make sure that you're being transparent about that. And then post TPK, I think it's also important to sit down and sort of just gauge the feelings of the people at the table. Did this totally blindside them? Are they ready to say goodbye to these characters? Are you, as the DM, ready to say goodbye to these characters? Because depending on what type of game you are running, depending on what type of story you are telling, you might be totally cool with like, all right, it's time for us to roll up new characters. This is just an aspect of the game, an aspect of the story. But if it's more story-driven, or, the players weren't really ready to say goodbye yet, you could create some cool story reason for them to continue. They all wake up in hell and now have to fight their way through Avernus, or they wake up in the Shadowfell and have to work their way through there. Or they roll up some temporary characters that have to go in and recover the bodies of their old characters and then resurrect them. There's so many different ways that you could continue on without really fully losing those original characters. So if that's something that you're wanting to do, talk to your players about it and see if that's something everybody wants to do. I don't think TPKs are inherently bad. I think it just really depends on how they are handled. And, how prepared the party was to deal with that, or, understand that as a possibility. And I mean, I kind of say that with a grain of salt, because most people aren't prepared for the entire party to die. That's kind of hard to be prepared for, but I guess just in general, being prepared for their characters to die. And then, we'll tackle the fact that they all died at the same time later. But I think as long as, like, you guys are communicating with each other, there's really nothing wrong with the TPK happening. Just try to make sure everybody's on the same page, and then you're fine. Communication solves, like, 90% of all problems, like, period, but absolutely 90% of all problems at your table. Because, like, that's typically why there are horror stories on Reddit. Nobody's talking to each other, and it leads to all these horrible things happening. So, just talk to each other. And just to touch a little bit on the, like, scripted TPK, I can see why some people would absolutely hate that. The reason why I think it's sometimes okay is because it just really depends on your table. It depends on the story you're setting. If that's been set up well, or, it's totally understandable and the story continues after the TPK, then it's probably fine. You just have to really, again, just communicate with your table. If it totally blindsides them and the story doesn't really continue afterwards, then, that's kind of not cool and not okay. So, just be careful with that. The main thing that most people would not like about that is the lack of agency. So, just be aware of that. Generally, people like to have some amount of control over their characters. So if there's going to be some weird scripted TPK, either make sure that they somehow get to continue with those same characters afterwards, or they are aware that that was something that could happen, or you've gauged how okay they would be, and, they fully trust you with the story and stuff like that. Like, just be a little careful about it. The reason why I wanted to talk about TPKs today is because I kind of experienced one the other day. It technically wasn't a true TPK. One player did survive. So, it's not like a full TPK, but it did happen. And, it made me think about this situation. And we're all totally fine as a table. And, we were okay with what happened. And it was an interesting experience and sort of a first for a lot of us. But, some people don't know what to do in these situations. So I thought it was an important topic to cover. And I'd love to go over some of the specifics of my TPK and kind of explain what led up to it and why it happened. And I should preface this by saying I have experienced a very similar situation. There was like a Christmas one-shot that led to like everybody except one dying, but that was more of like some crazy like skill challenge event, and everybody failed except one. And this most recent experience was a brutal encounter that led to almost the entire party dying. So let's talk a little bit about it. I'm going to be a little bit vague so that I avoid spoiling things for some people, but basically this scenario, this like almost TPK, was the result of like a combination of the couple of things that I was talking about earlier. First things first, there were just some things that were not in their favor. Luck was not on their side. What really brought a bunch of people down was the combination of a legendary action that was immediately followed by the monster's action. And that happening was like pure luck. I was waiting until a certain amount of damage was done before I did this legendary action. And it happened to work out right before my actual turn. So I was able to kind of like 1-2 punch and deal this brutal damage that knocked out almost every single person in the party. And that was honestly pretty catastrophic. And that was purely just the luck of how that worked out. They did the exact amount of damage I was waiting for at that moment, and then I struck, and it was devastating. Another thing that led to this TPK was just poor decisions on the party's, front. They had fought multiple encounters that day, and they decided not to rest at all. They decided to keep going. I even tried to, subtly encourage them to stop and take a short rest at least, or try to stop and heal up. And they decided not to do that. So that is a decision that they made, and they suffered some consequences. Also, they definitely knew that they were entering a dangerous location, or that there were monsters and, potentially unknown threats that were lurking nearby, and they still continued to forge on ahead despite those risks. So, they made those decisions, and it led to this almost TPK. And also, it was some poor planning on my end as well. I knew that this particular monster was pretty devastating. I really did not think it would result in a near full party wipe. I really thought I would only get maybe 1 or 2, but not all. But I misjudged what their tactics would be in the scenario, and how they would read how hurt or formidable this foe was. And so it was a perfect storm. They all closed in, not knowing that I could do this big area effect thing, and it happened, and it was devastating, and I really thought they would run earlier, and they didn't. And I just didn't think about how the legendary action followed by the immediate action, and how that stacked up would affect them, and that was also a pretty rough thing. Also, I realized mid-combat that some of the saving throws that the players had to make to not take the full effects of damage were so high that some of them were not able to actually save against them. Only some of the party members were, and so that was especially brutal. I do think if the party were at full health, they could have squeaked by. If they adjusted their tactics, I really do think that they could have defeated this foe, but it just did not work out for them. But yeah, it was pretty shocking. It was pretty brutal, but we all kind of talked about how crazy it was, and we were able to continue on and continue telling the story that we were telling, and we were totally fine, because it's not the first time that I have, warned them about the possibility of death within our games, and so they were aware of the threats. It's definitely something that we've talked about as a table, and we were fine, and we were sort of laughing about it after the fact. So because we communicate so often with each other, it was not an issue for us, but it was definitely a big learning experience for me personally, and I think for them as well. TPKs can be very scary. They can be really shocking, but I do think you can learn a lot. I think that there's something to be gained about at least running a one-shot sometime that is designed to be devastating. Just to see exactly what your party can pull out, and how they handle that situation. How do they react when they find that the battle is unwinnable? I think there is something to be gained from an experience like that, but maybe test it out in a one shot or something like that instead of your full-fledged campaign. But yeah, that was today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found the topic interesting, or found some of the advice and information useful to you. If you enjoy this channel and you want to help me out, feel free to like and subscribe. That stuff is definitely super helpful to me, but what is way more important is commenting down below. The engagement on the video is really what helps other people find this channel, and that's really important, and that helps build, our audience and our little community of misfits over here. So please do that. But with all of that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. Well, I have it. I have the new 2024 revised Player's Handbook, and I'm actually really excited. It's so conflicting because I think most of you know that I get really bad at Wizards of the Coast and I was pretty frustrated over the D&D Beyond stuff too. So I think you know how conflicted I am about this whole thing, but I have just heard countless positive opinions and feedback on this revision, and it's something that I knew I needed to look at with my own eyes. So, I went to my local gaming store on September 3rd, and I snagged a copy, and it's really, really pretty. I really like it. It's the alt cover, I believe. It's the only one they had, but it's great, and I'm excited to pour through it, and I'd be interested to know how much you guys would want me to talk about it. I fully plan on doing a comparison between this guy and the 2014 Player's Handbook, and just sort of comparing what's in this versus what's in that. But if there's other aspects of the revision that you want me to cover, let me know. It's weird. This is literally, this is the first official Wizards of the Coast D&D purchase I have made since the OGL. So if that tells you anything about how frustrated I was about that whole thing and how conflicting this purchase probably was for me, I hope it gets that across, because literally I've, for 2 years, I've not bought any Wizards of the Coast stuff. So yeah, kind of crazy that I waited that long, but I knew I kind of had to get it and pour through it. So, if there's certain things that you want me to talk about or cover or dive into, please let me know. I'd be super interested to hear what you guys are wanting to see. And if there's other video topics you guys would be interested in, let me know. My list is running a little low. I generally will come up with something by the time I need to film, but just to be fully transparent, would love some suggestions. That would be great. But anyway, hope you guys, have a good day, good rest of your week, and till next time.